The Galactic Concord had kept peace among the stars for 3,000 years. It was a fragile peace, held together by old rules and older species who had divided the galaxy among themselves long before humans learned to build fires on Earth. When humanity finally reached the stars, the elder races looked at them the way a king might look at a beggar at his gate. They gave humans a single star system on the very edge of known space. A small world called New Geneva became humanity's capital among the stars. The elder races told humans to be grateful for this gift and to stay quiet. Ambassador. Alara Vance had spent 17 years making sure humanity followed every rule. She had memorized every law of the Concord. She had smiled through every insult from species who called humans the young vermin behind closed doors. She had bowed when she wanted to stand tall. She had stayed silent when she wanted to scream. But she had built something important. She had earned humanity a place at the table, even if it was the smallest chair in the room. Other species had begun to see humans as civilized, as worthy of basic respect. It was not much, but Alara had worked for every piece of it. She was 53 years old, with gray streaks in her dark hair and lines around her eyes that came from too many sleepless nights. Her office on the diplomatic station orbited a neutral world, filled with gifts from 100 species. She kept a small photograph on her desk showing the green hills of New Geneva, where her daughter lived with her family. On the morning everything changed, Alara was reviewing trade agreements. Boring work, but necessary. Her assistant, a young man named Thomas, brought her coffee the way she liked it. The day seemed ordinary. Then her communication screen lit up with an emergency signal. The message came from Kepler-4 for it to be humanity's second colony. 11 million people lived there. Farmers, scientists, teachers, children. It was a young world, full of hope and hard work. Alara had visited twice and remembered the smell of the alien flowers that grew in the colonists' gardens. The message was broken and full of static. A woman's voice, terrified, spoke between bursts of noise. They came without warning. Wrath warships. They're bombing the cities. Please, someone help us. Please, the message ended. Alara sat very still. Her coffee grew cold in her hands. Thomas stood frozen by the door, his face pale. Over the next 6 hours, more information arrived. Each piece was worse than the last. The Vreth Dominion, one of the most powerful members of the Galactic Concord, had sent a fleet of 200 warships to Kepler-4 for 2B. They had not declared war. They had not made demands. They had simply arrived and started killing. The colony's small defense force was destroyed in minutes. The planetary shields fell in an hour. After that, the Vreth ships rained fire on every city, every town, every farm. They were thorough. They were patient. They made sure nothing survived. 11 million human beings died in a single day. Alara received the final report at midnight. She read it alone in her office with the lights dimmed. The words blurred as tears ran down her face. She thought of the children who had waved at her from a schoolyard on her last visit. She thought of the old farmer who had given her a jar of honey made from alien bees. She thought of 11 million voices silenced forever. She allowed herself 1 hour to grieve. She locked her door, put her head in her hands, and wept. She wept for the dead. She wept for their families who would never see them again. She wept for the universe that allowed such cruelty. When the hour ended, she dried her eyes. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw something new in her own face. The grief was still there, but something harder had joined it. Something cold and patient and absolutely certain. The Galactic Council called an emergency session 3 days later. Representatives from every major species gathered in the Great Chamber. A massive hall built into an asteroid that had witnessed 10,000 years of cosmic history. The ceiling showed the stars themselves, a reminder of what they all shared. Everyone expected humanity to beg. The elder races had seen this before. Young species suffered tragedy, came to the council, and asked for help. Sometimes they received justice. Usually they received empty words and small payments. The strong did what they wished, and the weak accepted what they must. The Vreth representative stood proudly at his place in the chamber. His species had bodies made of living crystal that chimed when they moved. He was beautiful in the way a knife is beautiful. His name was Counselor Thresh, and he had authorized the attack on Kepler-4, for to be personally, he felt no guilt. Humans were insects to him. They had settled a world that the Vreth wanted, so the Vreth had taken it. This was how the galaxy worked. This was how it had always worked. Ambassador Alara Vance entered the chamber alone. She wore simple black clothes, the human color of mourning. Her footsteps echoed against the ancient floor. Every eye in the room turned to watch her. She walked to the center of the chamber, where speakers addressed the council. She stood straight and still, a small human woman surrounded by beings who had ruled the stars for millennia. Counselor. Thresh made a sound like breaking glass. It was the Vreth way of laughing. The vermin comes to beg, he said. How touching. Perhaps we will give them another small world to infest. Far from Vreth space, of course. Other representatives chuckled. A few looked uncomfortable, but none spoke against him. Alara waited until the laughter stopped. She let the silence stretch. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm and clear. 17 years ago, I came to this chamber for the first time. I was afraid. I was humble. I wanted only for my people to survive in a galaxy that saw us as nothing. She paused and looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every representative. Learned your laws? I followed your rules. I built relationships with honor and patience. I believed that civilization meant something. I believed that treaties meant something. Her gaze settled on Counselor Thresh. He stopped laughing. 3 days ago, the Vreth Dominion murdered 11 million of my people. They broke the treaty of peaceful coexistence. They broke the founding laws of this very Concord. They did it because they believed no one would stop them. Alara smiled then. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had seen the worst and found something unbreakable inside herself. You have made, she said softly, a categorical error. The chamber fell silent. Something in her voice made ancient beings feel for the first time in centuries. A strange sensation they had almost forgotten. Fear, the council dismissed Ambassador Vance's words as the empty threats of a grieving woman. What could humanity possibly do? They had no great fleet. They had no powerful allies. They controlled 2 worlds while the Vreth Dominion ruled over 300. The numbers told the whole story. The story said humanity was nothing. Counselor Thresh spoke to his aides as he left the chamber that day. Let the vermin make noise, he said. Sound and fury from the weak always fades. In a month, they will accept whatever scraps we offer and be grateful. He was wrong. He was catastrophically, historically wrong. But he did not know it yet. What no one in the galaxy understood was what Ambassador Alara Vance truly represented. She was not just a diplomat. She was the visible face of something much larger and much more dangerous. For 200 years, ever since humanity first made contact with alien life, they had followed the rules. They had accepted their small place in the cosmic order. They had smiled and nodded and said yes to every demand. But they had also done something else, something no one noticed, because no one was watching. They had prepared. Humanity's leaders, going back generations, had understood a simple truth. In a galaxy of ancient powers, the young and weak had only 2 choices. They could remain weak forever, or they could become strong in ways their enemies did not expect. Open strength would be crushed. So humanity chose hidden strength instead. They built the most sophisticated intelligence network the galaxy had ever seen. Human traders traveled everywhere, and everywhere they went, they listened. Human scientists collaborated with every species willing to share knowledge, and they learned more than their teachers intended. Human diplomats like Alara attended every meeting, joined every committee, and gathered every scrap of information they could find. For 2 centuries, this information flowed back to Earth in New Geneva. Analysts worked day and night, building maps of power and weakness that no other species possessed. They knew trade routes that even the traders had forgotten. They knew secrets that governments had buried for millennia. They knew exactly where every major power was vulnerable, and they waited for the day they would need to use what they knew. That day had come, Ambassador. As returned to her office after the council session. She did not waste time feeling sorry for herself. She opened a secure channel to Earth and spoke with Admiral Chen Wei, the head of humanity's strategic planning division. "Begin Phase 1, she said. "It's understood," he replied. "May I say, Ambassador, that it has been an honor working with you all these years. Today, we see if it was worth it. For all of them. For the 11 million, Phase 1 did not involve weapons or ships. It involved truth. Within 24 hours, a massive data release spread across every communication network in the galaxy. It contained evidence gathered over decades, verified and organized, and impossible to deny. The evidence told a story that the Vreth Dominion had kept hidden for 3,000 years, Kepler 4 for 2b. Was not the first time the Vreth had destroyed a civilization. The data showed 17 other species that had disappeared over the millennia. The official history said they had died from natural disasters, plagues, asteroid impacts, solar flares, tragic accidents that no one could have prevented. The truth was different. The truth was murder. The Vreth had systematically exterminated 17 species because those species controlled resources the Vreth wanted. They had done it quietly, making each genocide look like bad luck. They had bribed officials, destroyed evidence, silenced anyone who asked questions. Now everyone knew. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Species that had allied with the Vreth for centuries suddenly looked at their partners with new eyes. The Marathi Federation, who had shared a border with the Vreth for 2,000 years, discovered that their ancient friends had killed the Marathis' closest trading partners 400 years ago. The Kalini Collective learned that the Vreth had caused the plague that killed half their population. 6 centuries passed. Trust shattered like glass. Within a week, 3 major powers formally withdrew from their alliances with the Vreth Dominion. Within 2 weeks, trade agreements that had stood for centuries were cancelled. Ships that had carried Vreth goods were turned away from ports across the galaxy. Counselor Thresh demanded an emergency session of the Council. He called the evidence fake, created by lying humans. He threatened war against anyone who believed the lies. He raged and shouted, and his crystal body chimed with fury. But no one listened anymore. The evidence was too detailed, too verifiable. Independent investigators confirmed piece after piece. Old mysteries finally had answers. And those answers all pointed to the Vreth. Ambassador Vance watched from her place in the chamber as Counselor Thresh lost his composure. She did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply watched. Thresh turned to her, his crystal form glowing with anger. "You think you have won something, vermin? Information is not power. Words are not weapons. The Vreth Dominion has 3,000 warships. What do you have?" Alara stood slowly. She looked at him with the patience of someone who has planned for exactly this moment. "Have more," she said. "Much more." She released Phase 2. The second wave of information targeted the Council itself. It showed records of bribes paid by the Vreth to Council representatives over centuries. It showed votes bought, decisions manipulated, laws bent to favor Vreth interests. It showed that the Galactic Concord, the great institution that had kept peace for 3,000 years, had been corrupted at its core. Half the Council suddenly had to answer very difficult questions. Some resigned. Some were arrested by their own governments. Some fled to Vreth space, abandoning any pretense of neutrality. Thresh stood alone in a chamber that was half empty. His allies had vanished. His reputation was destroyed. His government was being denounced by former friends across the galaxy, and Ambassador Vance had not fired a single shot. She walked toward him through the chaos. Representatives shouted at each other. Alarms rang as security tried to restore order. But Alara moved calmly through it all until she stood directly in front of the Vreth counselor. "You killed 11 million people," she said quietly. "You thought there would be no consequences. You thought we were weak?" She leaned closer. "You were wrong about us," she whispered. "You were so very wrong. And I am only getting started." She turned and walked away. Thresh watched her go, and for the first time in his long life, he felt something his species rarely experienced: He felt doubt in his private chambers that night. He sent an urgent message to the Vreth homeworld. "Send more ships," he wrote. "Prepare for war. The humans are more dangerous than we understood." But ships could not fight what was coming. The humans had learned something that the elder races had forgotten over there: millennia of power. The most powerful weapon is not the one that destroys bodies. It is the one that destroys trust. And trust, once broken, can never be fully rebuilt. 3 weeks after the massacre at Kepler 442b, the galaxy finally understood what made humanity truly dangerous. It was not their strength. It was not their numbers. It was something far more terrifying: patience. Humans could wait. They could plan for decades, for centuries, building toward a goal that most species would abandon after a few years. They could swallow pride and suffer insults, all while quietly preparing for the moment when patience would pay off. Other species found this deeply unsettling once they realized what it meant. Ambassador Hilaria Vance demonstrated this truth in the 3rd week of her campaign against the Vreth Dominion. She did not call for war. She did not demand blood for blood. Instead, she called for something that sounded gentle but cut far deeper. She called for accountability. The Galactic Concord had laws about territory and property. These laws said that any world claimed through violence or fraud was not legally owned. The original inhabitants, or their descendants, had the right to reclaim such worlds. For 3,000 years, no one had enforced these laws against the Vreth. No one had dared. But now, with the evidence of 17 genocides public knowledge, everything changed. Ambassador Vance stood before the council and presented her case. The Vreth Dominion controlled 300 worlds. At least 60 of those worlds had been taken from species the Vreth had exterminated. Under Concord law, those worlds were stolen property. Their legal status was void. And here was the key: Vreth currency was backed by the resources of their empire. If 60 worlds were suddenly declared illegally held, the entire economic foundation of the Dominion became questionable. The council debated for 2 days. Vreth representatives threatened, bribed, and begged. But too many council members had been exposed in the earlier revelations. The honest ones who remained felt the weight of 3,000 years of corruption. They wanted to prove that the Concord still stood for something. They ruled in favor of Ambassador Vance's argument. The effect was immediate. Vreth currency collapsed within hours. Banks across the galaxy refused to honor Vreth credits. Merchants demanded payment in other forms. The vast wealth of the Dominion turned to worthless numbers on screens. Counselor Thresh sent furious messages to every government he could reach. He promised revenge. He promised war. But his promises meant nothing when he could no longer pay his soldiers or fuel his ships. Ambassador Vance was not finished. She had studied Vreth supply lines for years. She knew that the Dominion depended on shipping routes that passed through neutral space. Dozens of smaller species allowed Vreth ships to cross their territory because they were afraid to refuse. But fear, Alara understood, was like a door that swings both ways. Those small species had feared the Vreth for centuries. Now they watched as the mighty Dominion stumbled and bled. They saw that the Vreth could be hurt, and hurt beings seemed less frightening. Human diplomats visited every one of these neutral territories. They did not threaten or demand. They simply talked. They reminded these species of their own rights under Concord law. They pointed out that allowing Vreth ships to pass was a choice, not an obligation. They suggested that perhaps a choice freely made could be freely changed. One by one, the neutral territories closed their borders to Vreth shipping. It happened slowly at first. A small kingdom near the Galactic Rim announced new inspection requirements that delayed Vreth convoys for weeks. A trading federation suddenly discovered environmental concerns about Vreth cargo. A religious commune declared that Vreth presence violated their sacred spaces. None of them directly defied the Dominion. They simply made passage difficult, expensive, and slow. Death by 1,000 small cuts. The Vreth war machine, so fearsome when it could strike anywhere at will, began to starve. Ships ran low on fuel. Soldiers waited for supplies that never arrived. Factories shut down because raw materials could not reach them, and still humanity had not fired a single weapon. But Ambassador Vance saved her greatest stroke for last. She had learned something about the Vreth people during her 17 years of diplomatic work. The Vreth government ruled through fear and propaganda. They told their citizens that the Dominion was perfect, that other species were inferior, that questioning authority was the greatest crime. But not all Vreth believed the lies. Some remembered a time before the current regime, when their species had valued art and philosophy instead of conquest. Some had lost family members to the government's internal purges. Some simply looked at the galaxy and saw that the official story did not match reality. These dissidents had been silent for centuries. They had no voice, no platform, no hope. Lara gave them all three. Human technicians had built a communication system that could broadcast to any world in the galaxy. It was meant for emergencies, for warnings about natural disasters or cosmic threats. Ambassador Vance used it for something different. She broadcast the testimonies of Vreth dissidents. For 3 days, every screen in the Dominion showed Vreth citizens speaking their truth. An elderly teacher described how the government had disappeared her son for writing poetry about peace. A former soldier confessed his guilt for massacres he had been ordered to commit. A scientist explained how she had been forced to develop weapons instead of cures. Thousands of voices, all saying the same thing. The Dominion is built on lies. We deserve better. We can be better. The government tried to block the signals. They failed. Human technology was too advanced, broadcast too carefully designed to be stopped. Citizens who had never questioned their rulers suddenly had questions. Families gathered in secret to discuss what they had seen. Young people who had been raised on propaganda heard their elders speak truths that had been forbidden for generations. Rebellion sparked on 12 Vreth worlds simultaneously. It began with protests. Crowds gathered in public squares, demanding answers. When police tried to disperse them, the crowds grew larger. When the military was called, some soldiers joined the protesters instead of fighting them. The Dominion had spent 3,000 years conquering other species. They had no experience with their own people rising against them. Ambassador Vance watched the reports from her office. She did not celebrate. She felt no joy in watching a civilization tear itself apart. Even a civilization that had murdered 11 million of her people. But she felt something like satisfaction. Thomas, her assistant, brought her tea and stood beside her as images of burning Vreth government buildings played on the screen. "You did this," he said quietly. "Without a single shot." Ilara shook her head. "I did not do this. The Vreth did this to themselves over 3,000 years of cruelty. I simply removed the walls they had built to hide the truth." She turned away from the screen. "Truth is the most dangerous weapon in the universe, Thomas, because you can destroy a city and rebuild it. You can kill a person and be forgiven. But once people see the truth, you cannot make them unsee it." She looked out her window at the stars. The Vreth are learning that lesson now, and I wonder if they will survive it. The Vreth Dominion was dying. Not quickly, not cleanly, but dying nonetheless. Their economy had collapsed. Their supply lines were broken. Rebellion burned across their worlds. Allies who had stood with them for millennia had turned away in disgust. Counselor. Thresh watched his empire crumble and felt something he had never experienced. Before desperation, he gathered what remained of the Vreth. Leadership and a secure bunker on their homeworld. The crystal beings huddled together, their one-sprout forms now dim with stress and fear. They had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. Now they faced extinction. "One human," Thresh said, his voice like cracking ice. "One single human female has done this to us. We must stop her. If we eliminate Ambassador Vance, the humans will have no leader. Their campaign will collapse. We can rebuild." His advisors nodded eagerly. They wanted to believe that the solution could be so simple. Kill one person and save everything. They made their plan. Vreth assassins were the best in the galaxy. They could become invisible, pass through walls, strike without warning. A team of 12 would infiltrate the diplomatic station where Vance worked. They would kill her staff, and broadcast her death across the galaxy as a warning. The humans would learn their place. The natural order would be restored. The assassins launched their mission 6 days later. They traveled through hidden routes, avoiding the closed borders, moving like ghosts through space. They reached the diplomatic station in the dead of night. They found it empty. Every room was dark. Every desk was cleared. Every computer had been wiped clean. The humans had vanished like smoke, leaving behind nothing but silence. The lead assassin searched desperately for any clue, any hint of where their target had gone. He found only one thing: a small note left on Ambassador Vance's desk, written in elegant script. "You are 6 hours too late. We have been watching you since you left your homeworld. Better luck next time." At that exact moment, Ambassador Elara Vance appeared in holographic form at the center of the Galactic Council chamber. Her image stood 40 feet tall. Projected onto the ancient floor where 10,000 species had spoken over the millennia, she was not alone. Behind her stood representatives of 11 different species. Some were elderly, survivors of attacks that had happened centuries ago. Some were young, descendants of civilizations the Vreth had tried to destroy. All of them had one thing in common: they had suffered at Vreth hands, and they had been brought together by humanity's patient diplomacy. The council chamber fell silent. Every representative, every observer, every camera drone focused on this unprecedented gathering. Elara spoke in a voice that carried the weight of countless murdered souls. For 3,000 years, the Vreth Dominion has violated the founding principles of this concord. They have committed genocide. They have corrupted this council. They have broken every treaty they signed while hiding behind the power of their military. She paused, letting her words echo through the chamber. "Yesterday, they attempted to assassinate me. This is their final crime. Not because I matter, but because it proves they have learned nothing. They still believe that killing their problems will make those problems disappear." She gestured to the beings standing behind her. "These are the survivors. These are the descendants of the 17 species the Vreth tried to erase from existence. Some of them have waited 500 years for this moment. Some have waited longer." An elderly creature stepped forward. His species had nearly died out for centuries ago. He was one of perhaps 2,000 remaining. His voice trembled but did not break. "My grandmother saw her world burn. She taught my mother the truth. My mother taught me. We remembered when everyone else forgot. We kept our pain alive because we knew this day would come." One by one, the other survivors spoke. Each story was different, but the pattern was the same. The Vreth came. The Vreth killed. The Vreth took everything. And then the Vreth lied about what they had done. When the last testimony ended, Ambassador Vance stepped forward again. "The Concord's founding charter allows for collective action against any member who violates the Treaty of Peaceful Coexistence. Article 7 authorizes the Council to impose full economic isolation, seizure of all extraterritorial holdings, and supervised transition of power." She looked around the chamber. "For 3,000 years, no one has invoked Article 7. The Vreth were too powerful. The costs seem too high. But power fades, and the cost of inaction has become higher than anyone imagined." She raised her hand. "I speak now for humanity and for the 11 species behind me. We invoke Article 7 against the Vreth Dominion. We call for a vote." Counselor Thresh was not present. He was hiding in his bunker, watching through a remote connection. He screamed at his screens, ordering his remaining allies to vote against the motion. But his allies were gone. Those who had not been exposed in earlier scandals had abandoned him. The vote was not close. 147 species voted in favor. 12 voted against. 31 abstained. Article 7 passed with the largest majority in Concord history. The Vreth Dominion was finished. Within hours, enforcement ships from a dozen species moved to secure Vreth holdings outside their core systems. Banks seized Vreth assets. The borders that had slowly closed now slammed shut completely. The Dominion was isolated, cut off from the galaxy they had terrorized for so long. Ambassador Vance did not celebrate. She sat in her quarters aboard a human ship, far from the station where assassins had searched for her. Thomas brought her tea, and she held the warm cup in her hands without drinking. "It's over," Thomas said. "You did it." Lara shook her head. "It is not over. The Vreth people are not gone. They are suffering now for crimes their leaders committed. Innocent beings are hungry and afraid because of what we have done." She looked at the stars through a window. "Victory without mercy is just another form of defeat. We have broken the Dominion. Now we must help the Vreth people build something better, or we are no different from those we have conquered." Thomas sat beside her. "That seems very human," he said softly. "To win a war and then worry about the enemy we defeated?" Ilara smiled sadly. "It is the most human thing of all, Thomas. We destroy what threatens us, and then we try to fix what we have broken. It is messy and contradictory and often fails." She finally took a sip of her tea. "But it is who we are, and perhaps, in the end, it is why we will survive when older and stronger species do not." In his bunker, Counselor Thresh watched his empire die. He thought about sending his remaining warships on a suicide mission against Earth. He thought about weapons of mass destruction hidden in secret vaults. He thought about taking as many humans with him as possible, but even he could see the truth now. Such actions would only prove that humanity had been right about the Vreth all along. It would ensure that his species would be remembered as monsters forever. He sat alone in the darkness, surrounded by the broken pieces of everything he had built, and he did nothing. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Vreth Dominion was silent. The Vreth Dominion did not fall in fire. There were no great battles, no heroic last stands, no dramatic explosions lighting up the void. Instead, it fell in silence. A slow, quiet collapse that was somehow more complete than any military defeat could have been. Counselor Thresh surrendered 3 months after Article 7 was invoked. He had no choice. His military had no fuel, no supplies, no will to fight. His government had lost control of half their worlds to internal rebellion. His people were starving because the systems that had fed them depended on galactic trade that no longer existed. He was taken to the council chamber in restraints. The same chamber where he had laughed at Ambassador Vance, where he had called humans vermin, where he had believed himself untouchable. Now he stood before judges from 12 species, answering for 3,000 years of crimes. The trial lasted 6 months. Every genocide was documented. Every bribe was traced. Every lie was exposed. Thresh tried to defend himself at first, claiming that he had only done what was necessary for his people. But the evidence was overwhelming, and eventually he fell silent. He was sentenced to live out his remaining years on a prison world, surrounded by nothing but the memories of what he had destroyed. It was, many said, a lighter sentence than he deserved. But Ambassador Vance had argued against execution. Dead martyrs become legends, she had told the council. Living prisoners become warnings. Let the galaxy see what becomes of those who believe they are above justice. With the old regime removed, the Vareth people faced an uncertain future. Their economy was shattered. Their reputation was ruined. Many expected them to become a broken species, fading into obscurity over the centuries. Instead, something remarkable happened. The dissidents who had spoken during Ambassador Vance's broadcasts became leaders of a new movement. They called themselves the Vreth Renewal, and they had a simple message. Their species had been capable of greatness once, before conquest became their only purpose. They could be great again, in a different way. A new government formed, built not on military power, but on transparency and accountability. It was fragile, clumsy, often ineffective. It made mistakes. It struggled to feed its people and rebuild its worlds. But it was honest. Honesty attracted help from unexpected places. Ambassador Vance herself traveled to the Vreth homeworld. 1 year after the Dominion's fall, it was a controversial decision. Many humans wanted nothing to do with the species that had murdered 11 million of their people. Some accused her of betraying the dead. She went anyway. The new Vreth leader, a female named Crystalline, met her at the spaceport. Crystalline had been one of the dissidents who had spoken during the broadcasts. She had lost her family to the old regime's purges. She had every reason to hate the universe, but she had chosen hope instead. "You should not have come," Crystalline said. "Many of my people still blame humanity for our suffering. They do not understand that we brought this upon ourselves." Lara nodded. "Many of my people still want revenge. They see your suffering and feel it is not enough. Pain makes understanding difficult." They walked together through streets that were still damaged from the rebellions. Buildings stood empty. Food distribution points had long lines. The crystal Vreth moved slowly, conserving energy because resources were scarce. "Why did you come?" Crystalline asked. Elara stopped walking. She looked at the Vreth around her, beings who had been her enemies, who had killed her people. She saw hunger and fear and desperate hope in their faces. "Because this is not over," she said. "Breaking your old government was necessary. But if we abandon your people now, something worse will take its place. Suffering breeds hatred. Hatred breeds violence. In 100 years, your grandchildren might decide to take revenge on mine." She turned to face Crystalline directly. "I did not do all of this just to create a new enemy for the future. I did it to break a cycle that had trapped the galaxy for 3,000 years. That means building something new, not just destroying what was old." The two leaders talked for hours. They discussed trade agreements that could help the Vreth rebuild. They planned cultural exchanges that could slowly heal the wounds between their peoples. They argued about details and compromised on principles and discovered that they had more in common than either. Had expected it was the beginning of something unprecedented. Not forgiveness? Not yet. But the possibility of forgiveness someday. The formal peace ceremony took place 1 year later, on neutral ground. Representatives of every species attended. The 11 survivors who had stood with Elara were there. Watching as a new chapter began, the Vreth renewal, government formally apologized for the destruction of Kepler-4 for 2b. They offered reparations that would take generations to fulfill. They promised to teach their children the truth about what the old regime had done, so that such horrors would never be repeated. Ambassador Vance accepted the apology on behalf of humanity. She did not smile or celebrate. She simply nodded and spoke words that would be remembered for centuries. "Accept this beginning. Not as an ending of grief, because grief does not end. Not as forgiveness, because forgiveness must be earned over time. But as a first step toward a future where our peoples can live without fear of each other." She paused. 11 million human beings died on Kepler-4 4b. We will never forget them. But we choose to honor their memory by building peace rather than continuing war. This is the human way. We break what threatens us, and then we try to heal what we have broken. After the ceremony, a young Vreth diplomat approached her. He had been a child when the old regime fell. He had grown up in the chaos and uncertainty of the renewal, hearing stories about the human woman who had destroyed an empire without firing a shot. "How?" he asked. "How did your species accomplish this?" "You had nothing. You were nobody." Elara looked at him for a long moment. She thought of the dead. She thought of the years of patient work. She thought of all the small decisions that had led to this moment. "We were underestimated," she said finally. "That is the most dangerous thing you can do to a human. Because we do not forget. We do not stop. And we have learned across all our bloody history that the most powerful weapon is not the one that destroys your enemy." She leaned closer. "It is the one that makes your enemy destroy themselves." The young Vreth stared at her, with wide crystal eyes. "What happens now?" he asked. Elara smiled, and for the first time in years, the smile reached her eyes. Now we build. Your people and mine, together. It will take generations. It will be difficult and frustrating, and sometimes we will want to give up. But we will continue, because that is what humans do." She turned to leave, then paused. "We were called young once. The elder races meant it as an insult. But youth is not weakness. Youth means we still believe that tomorrow can be better than today. Youth means we have not yet learned to accept injustice as normal. She looked up at the stars, visible even through the station's ceiling. The galaxy is old and tired. It has accepted cruelty as the price of survival for too long. Perhaps it needs something young to remind it that there are other ways. Leaving the young Vreth standing in the shadow of a galaxy forever changed, Ambassador Alara Vance died 40 years later. Surrounded by family and friends and representatives from 100 species, the Vreth Renewal sent their highest officials to her funeral. Her face was carved into monuments on 12 worlds, but she would have said that monuments did not matter. What mattered was what came after. What mattered was that her great-grandchildren grew up in a galaxy where the Vreth were partners instead of enemies. What mattered was that the cycle of violence had been broken, at least for one generation. The rest would be up to those who came after, and humans, as Alara had proven, were very good at playing the long game.